Okay, good evening. Welcome to the March program for Appalachia Audubon Society. And thank you for joining us this evening. Our chapter is over 50 years old, and our mission is to protect the rich biodiversity of the Florida Panhandle through education, appreciation, and conservation. We serve 6 counties: Leon, Jefferson, Wakulla, Gadsden, Liberty, and Franklin. And I should say that, yeah, we apologize for the 3-month hiatus. We missed January and February programs because of unforeseen circumstances with our speakers. So glad to be back, even in the Zoom realm. So after tonight's program, we will have one more regular program coming up, which will also be a Zoom event. On April 21st, Dr. Bob Cooper from the University of Georgia will talk about the importance of healthy insect populations for birds to survive. You may have heard that there are approximately 3 billion fewer birds, and that's billion with a B, in North America than there were 50 years ago. A closer look at the data suggests that the declines were largest among birds that are insectivorous, at least during the breeding season. And he will delve into this concerning topic, and it should be a really good learning experience for all of us. On Sunday, May 15th, we will be holding our annual banquet in person and in a new format, a potluck picnic at Tall Timbers. This will start at 4 p.m. for socializing and birding, and the picnic will start at 5:30 p.m. After dinner, Jim Cox will give a presentation titled Firebirds and the History of the Stoddard Bird Program. This year, we have been celebrating the joy of birds, and in early April, we will have an in-person talks featuring a speaker who absolutely personifies the joy of birding, Noah Stricker. Called a travel pioneer by the BBC and Birdman of Razzmatazz by Newsweek, Noah is a 35-year-old writer, photographer, and birdman based near Eugene, Oregon. In 2015, during a quest spanning 41 countries and all 7 continents, including Antarctica, he set a world big year record by finding 6,042 species of birds. And that's more than half of all the bird species on planet Earth. At 3 p.m. Sunday, April 3rd, at the Challenger Learning Center Digital Dome, Noah will be giving a talk about his experience researching penguins with an audience of children in mind. If that's something that you're interested in bringing child to, you know, we're thinking sort of 8 to 12, but, you know, children of all ages are welcome. This is going to be in the Digital Dome, so the seating is limited. We'd appreciate it if you want to reserve a seat, just send an email to appalachiaudubon@gmail.com, and someone will put that in the chat. Just shoot us an email and we'll put you on the list for reserve a seat. At 7 p.m. Tuesday, April 5th, at the FSU King Building Auditorium, our regular in-person meeting location, he will present Birding Without Borders, recounting his big year in 2015. This entertaining presentation will cover the funniest, weirdest, and most inspiring stories, as much about the people he encountered during his journey as the birds. We are looking into doing this as a hybrid event, both in person and streaming. You know, more on that later, and check our program page on our website, and our Limkin Times newsletter will have a registration link for that if we are able to work that out with the FSU auditorium technical people. So that night, we will be starting at 6 p.m. with a book signing in the lobby. If you have copies of any of his books, feel free to bring them to be signed. If you want to buy a copy of Birding Without Borders, we will be selling the paperback editions for $15. That's about $1 less than normal retail. Cash or check only, please. We will not be able to do credit card transactions. And I'm happy to add that one of our board members covered the purchase cost of the books. So 100% of the proceeds from the book sales will go directly to Appalachia Audubon We'll also be taking donation towards Noah's honorarium Tuesday evening. And you can also donate via the PayPal link on our website. So I think with that, that's what I have for you this evening. And I'm going to hand it off to Heather Leafy, who is going to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thanks for that, Kathleen. And one quick reminder, this Sunday, we do have a field trip to Hickory Mound unit of Big Bend Wildlife Management Area that Peter and I will be leading. There's more information about that on our website. So Gina Kent has been a conservation scientist for the Avian Research and Conservation Institute for more than 20 years, studying a variety of species in Florida, especially raptors. She completed her master's degree at Georgia Southern University, researching swallow-tailed ecology, and has since managed numerous avian research and monitoring projects. She's a skilled field biologist, conservationist, and makes an effort to communicate science with the public, which we all know is really important. She's also a very active member with Alachua Audubon. Gina is a delight to go in the field with and always has a smile on her face. She's really someone that I look up to. And I'm personally really looking forward to learning more about the 3 focal raptor species she's going to be teaching us about tonight. And with that, I will pass it to you, Gina.
Okay, you should probably hear me now. Just thanks for spending your St. Patrick's Day with me, and I am wearing going to share some information about 3 of my very favorite. My video is choppy, so I'm going to turn that on the pretty pictures given to us by very wonderful photographers. I myself am not a shout out to all those great photographers that helped us make our presentation tonight. Let me share my screen. Should work. And I'm stop video. All right, hopefully you are hearing me still, and I can share this presentation with you tonight. So I do work for Avian Research and Conservation Institute. We are based in Gainesville, but that's just convenience. We work everywhere from the Florida Keys and working on Swallow-tailed Kite projects, then all over the Caribbean and those places that the Swallow-tailed Kite migrates to, which are parts of Central and South America. We work and get funding from wildlife and a lot of the state and other federal organizations. So something these 3 birds I'm going to talk about have in common, and as well as other bird species within Florida, is that Florida is rapidly changing, developing not live as an endangered species. And neither is the short-tailed hawk, but as you'll see, they are species of concern for their own right. And each of these birds separately, and there's so much 45-minute talk on each of these species, but I'm just going to dabble into all 3 of them. So Short-tailed hawks are a buteo type hawk, so they are related to, say, your familiar red-shouldered hawk. They're a little bit smaller, and they come in a light morph or a dark morph. There's no integrade, so you won't they would have either light or dark or sometimes both of the chicks, and it's not a male or female thing. It's just a color morph that they come in. These birds specialize in eating small birds, so they have this fantastic hunting technique where they'll circle in the sky and act like a vulture, and then they dive unknown unaware prey that think maybe it's a circle of vultures ahead above them, and then they swoop down and often take birds on the wing or right out of the treetops or into the marshes.
Gina,
Yeah.
Gina, this is Kathleen. I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment because we're having some serious audio issues with your, and I'm almost wondering if maybe you should, go back to Wi-Fi and maybe use, I should have thought before about having you come in on phone instead, but we're having a hard time following the talk. So maybe it'd be better to go back to the Wi-Fi. Can you just switch without logging out?
I've not tried to do that before.
I don't know if that'll kick you out, right? I'm so sorry.
No, I'm
apologize,
so
everyone.
sorry.
Everything was working fine until she started talking.
All right,
Yeah, I suspect she'll have to log out and log back in, which is fine. I'll pause the recording.
Okay, stop my video. Okay. Okay, can you see my slide here?
Slides are good.
Slides are good.
Short-tailed hawks in Florida. It's good. Great. Okay. So there's less than 250 pairs within the state. And in the United States, they are essentially only in Florida. And so their population size is quite small. If you look at their general range, they do range into South America, parts of Central America and Mexico. And there's a few records of nesting birds that even come into Arizona and maybe Southern Texas, but those are very, very few and far between. So we have all of the US short-tailed hawks right here in the peninsular part of Florida. So what we've done is looked at nest success and productivity. We've monitored their movement through telemetry and population studies. And then all of this adds to learning more for their management and conservation needs so we can make appropriate recommendations. One of our main studies started in the wintering areas where short-tailed hawks gather in the non-breeding season. Many of them that nest up through peninsular Florida migrate down south of Lake Okeechobee into South Florida. Here's a picture of us flying over the Florida Keys, and you can see that baseball diamond in the foreground there. That is a park where we would capture migrating short-tailed hawks. And once we would catch them, we would put a transmitter on them, VHF, and so we could track them using telemetry from a plane or from the ground, and then find where they were nesting after released on their wintering grounds. So we'd fly those following years and following summer from after tagging those birds, and we would locate breeding females on nests, which was so exciting because, these are new places, often very inaccessible to the public. So this area here is on the west coast of Florida in the Chassahowitzka National Wildlife Refuge. So anyone would just detect a nest because it's so inaccessible. And this is what it looks like from above. So it's this beautiful swampland forest. And we actually climbed in there. It was like a 2-mile walk into the swamp, and found a beeping tree with a nest on it. And it was very exciting to come upon this nest in here, and which would have otherwise been unknown. So we detected quite a few of these new nesting areas throughout the state. And this was an unbiased way of finding nesting short-tailed hawks. And through the telemetry work, we've noted what we assumed is that the birds are making a true migration, albeit short, because they aren't leaving the state. They go to parts of South Florida, and this bird specifically had kind of 2 winter ranges. So if you start in the south, in the Florida Keys, the bird was tagged in the Everglades and then migrated north to area just north of Orlando where it nested. And then the following year, it came down to like Hendry County. So those big agricultural areas south of Lake Okeechobee. And then it went back to the Florida Keys. So it had kind of a 2-step winter range, which was really neat to see. And other studies we've done with short-tailed hawks, this bird was tagged in support from the St. Petersburg Audubon Society at Sawgrass Lake Park in Pinellas County. And this bird, and it stayed on territory in Pinellas County the whole time. You can see that the concentration of the points on the left side are, maybe you can see my cursor. Yeah, here we go. This is basically where the nest area is, and was flying out to the east to these portions of marsh area and mangrove, where it was probably eating a lot of red-winged blackbirds and grackles, and then coming back each night to either feed young or roost here. This bird went through Hurricane Irma, sat right there on territory the whole time, and made it through just fine, which was quite a feat. We're continuing with now is doing a very straightforward road survey. So as the short-tailed hawks gather in the winter in South Florida, they kind of bunch up, and it's a great time to detect them and kind of just keep a tally of numbers over time. It's not an absolute count of how many short-tails are in Florida, but it's just like a status or a number to track over time to get a trend. So we have these routes through the Everglades and then all the way down the Florida Keys, where we essentially pop out at certain points for short-tailed hawks. And when we can note the age and color morph, we do. So an adult would be solid dark, like this dark morph, and the young dark morphs are more mottled underneath, black and white. The young light morphs are a little trickier. You have to see them a little closer because they have kind of a pale auricular, kind of the feathers around the ear. That's the most common trait of the young ones, but when possible, we would just keep track of those things as well. And here's some wonderful volunteers from Alachua Audubon that were down helping me in the Florida Keys keep track of these birds. So that's just a little shout out if you are interested in helping on a short-tailed hawk survey. We do them at the end of October through early December, maybe 3 or 4 surveys. And it's great to have company if you've got 3 or 4 days to do a trek down to the Florida Keys with me. I'd love to have you come along. And short-tailed hawks can share the sky at this time of year with swallow-tailed kites as they come back to their nesting areas. Right now, they are both species are getting ready to nest. And I'm going to swap over to learning a little bit more about swallow-tailed kites. They used to nest all the way up the Mississippi River, up into Wisconsin and Minnesota and all points between. And now they've, after logging, essentially, their nesting range has really constricted to parts of 7 or 8 states. They've just recently started nesting into North Carolina, which is kind of an extension of their range. One of the things, swallowtail kites are very social. So for them to recolonize a brand new place is quite an ordeal. So we would expect them to kind of bud off of where they are presently. And that's what seems to be going on in North Carolina, because they do nest up into the floodplains of South Carolina, right to the border. So they've hopped over and they've started nesting in North Carolina. When a swallowtail kite finds a nesting spot, it likes to be in a super emergent tree. So a tree that's above the canopy that has a sprawling branches and crotch where they can fit their little sticks and a ton of moss in. Like, you can see how much Spanish moss is just gluing these little sticks together. If you see a swallowtail kite up close, or next time you see it, try to look at its feet, and I bet you can't see them. They're so teeny tiny. They eat insects, they eat frogs, they eat little anoles. So they don't have these mega feet that can like grab giant branches like a osprey or eagle or even a red-shouldered hawk. You know, they've got these little dainty toes to put those branches all together and keep them in one spot. They use a ton of Spanish moss, and then that old man's beard lichens, the nice light green. But you can see there's a lot of baby poop in this nest too. It's pretty gross. When a swallowtail kite, or if you think of like maybe you've been lucky to see a osprey poop, or even a spit out, right? It can go quite a ways, but not a swallowtail kite. It just kind of blops out, and the parents keep bringing more and more nest material, and then it gets pretty high for these birds to be sitting on top of their nest, and sometimes that's precarious, and they get thrown out in a big wind. So another kind of wary thing for them, being on top of these big trees. We are currently working with the American Bird Conservancy and many industrial timber forests to look more at how swallowtail kites are using these industrial forests. There's so many of these properties in the Southeast where swallowtail kites are nesting, and it's quite compatible. Big trees kind of scattered about. It's a win-win for both situations, for the kites and for what the paper companies need to do. In this photo, you can see these kind of dark masses here are like the big trees within timber forests that were left behind. So these are going to be the emergent pines that the kites would use maybe on a row marking a boundary line or something like that. But then they love to forage in this kind of mosaic of different or like layers of canopy heights and edges where they can reach insects and anoles and tree frogs that are climbing up into the high part of the adults diet is mostly insects, as they just want to feed on the wing and keep going, but you know, they can't just carry a beetle or a wasp back to their chick over and over and over again. They need those bigger packages. They need to eat baby birds from nests, and sometimes bats and rough green snakes and things that you know, have tied the kids over for a while they go feeding. So they eat a lot of those bigger things when they have chicks. And we've recently were in 2 online magazines you see here. I encourage you to check out the Audubon and the biographic articles, both the same story, but they have different different photos in them, which are fantastic. So it's more about our timber relationships and what we're doing to try to encourage nesting in these places. So we've done a lot with telemetry of swallowtail kites. We've started with VHF telemetry, which is the handheld classic radio telemetry work. And then as the technology changes, we went to using GPS solar powered satellite transmitters, which you see here. And you can see maybe this antenna sticking off the bird, right? And then the back of the transmitter has a solar panel that recharges the battery in there. And we've had them on swallowtail kites and working for like 7 years, and still the bird outlived the transmitter. So it's pretty amazing, the technology. And now something even lighter and less, with no antenna, and still with that solar powered and GPS capability, are transmitters that communicate with cell phone towers, and that's called GSM. And that's mostly what we use now because the technology is much cheaper. It's much more efficient. But you know, we only tag birds for specific reasons. You know, it's specific questions. So you know, we've really felt like we've learned the migration route, but now some of our bigger questions are within these timber company properties. We'll be tagging a few more birds, learning about how they are using these harvest areas over time. And then another big thing is to find communal roosts. So swallow-tailed kites give us a wonderful opportunity to keep track of their numbers over time in a very fabulous way. Because they are social, they get into these groups together during migration, right after the chicks fledge and right before they mine these places, which are used over and over. And so we've discovered over 12 large roosts. 4 of them have over 1,000 birds in them through the season. And we during late July and early August, they gather in these places, and that's towards the peak of when they're here. And we get in small planes and we fly early in the morning before the birds get up. Now, the point is not to flush them, of course. And then we can just circle around very high and take photos of the birds in these roosts, and then count the birds in the pictures, and we get a great status and trend of how many birds are using these places over time. And you know, we've done this since 2006, and we keep finding more roosts and more birds. So a little amount of time that we are seeing some increase. And so you know, the kites aren't necessarily repopulating these 21 states that they were in, but their numbers are still increasing within the places that they are. So they're filling in the gaps. I think they're getting more used to nesting around people, and you know, whether that's a good thing or I mean, adaptability is great. So and as we see the future of Florida with development, it's probably a good thing. So we're very lucky to have these places where the swallowtail kites gather year after year. They are so important for these birds because they are using each other to find these places to sleep safely at night, and then they follow each other to foraging areas where they can gather and feed on a bunch of insects normally, so they get fat and get ready for migration. So they have to put on a lot of weight to be ready for heading 5,000 miles in the next couple months. So they've got to, you know, be ready. And their first step is to cross the Gulf of Mexico. So they're in these large foraging aggregations. Sometimes it's or get to see some of these foraging areas. Fortunately, just west of Gainesville, we had some watermelon fields in Gilchrist County last year that had thousands of birds, or hundreds, I should say. It was probably almost 1,000 birds, maybe 600 to 1,000. But man, if you can drive down, it's so cool to see it. And it's safe. It's safe for the birds because there's insects everywhere and so many places they can go, and you're not going to be in their way. And so it's a good place to pull off a road and just watch birds flutter by you like a snow globe. It's just phenomenal. And this is what they're getting ready to do. They're putting on this weight to fly across the Gulf of Mexico and go to South America. So each color is a different bird, and this is their southbound migration route. I think the next picture I have is of a map of a bird named sawgrass, also tagged in Pinellas County, that migrated, gosh, we tracked her 5 years. I will run through the years and tell you, 2016 south, 2016 north, 2017 south. So it goes fast and we can even watch it twice, but here we go. All right, 2016 south. Actually, I can't see. Coming north. Next year south. Next year north. Very similar routes. You'll see that. Next year south. Coming back north. And you can see the pause and how long some of this, where it's faster or slower, that means this bird spent more time in those areas. So it kind of varied its southbound migration each year. Its first migration south, it actually was in northern Argentina, which was the first time any of our tracked birds had spent any time there. So that was really neat. But then it seemed to like refine its and we believe sawgrass is still alive, and her transmitter was just starting to struggle this past season south. So in September of 2021, we lost her signal just into Colombia before she crossed the Andes. So she's been a trooper, and I'm sure she's fine, but she's done all of this awesome migration year after year. It's just really amazing that we have these tracks over time. And the neat thing we're looking forward to is, seeing, especially in the wintering range, because we just know so little about what they do down there. We have been down there. We've had seen some of the ranches where they're hanging out for the winter, and they're in big groups down there as well. But these places change and they move around a lot. And I've heard just recently that like Brazil is on fire. I mean, they're literally lighting fires everywhere, and I mean some natural as well, but you know, it's changing and the kites have to adapt to that. So and they're also converting to large scale agriculture. So these big family farms with cows and big trees and lots of termite mounds are being converted to just solid sugarcane or solid soybean. So we really want to keep track over time of what's going on with the birds and where they're going. So especially like migration like this, where we have year after year, it's very valuable information. And they're leaving the United States right when hurricane season is starting. So they have a lot of adverse weather to power through, and we lose birds over the Gulf of Mexico. This is the most critical part of their migration. And what we've also seen with our colleague in Louisiana is that she's tagged birds, swallowtail kites there, and they go around the Gulf of Mexico. They don't cross the water. So that's a much safer route, right? But it takes a little longer. So, you know, risk weighing is something these birds do all the time. Once they're headed north, it's a very similar migration route. But check this out. Once they hit the Yucatan Peninsula, they start cutting corners here. I should say even before that. So this is Honduras. They cross the Gulf of Honduras and then get to the northern Yucatan. And then instead of trying to hit the southern tip of Florida, they head directly north as much as possible, because it's kind of like a catcher's mitt, right? If they were to go for the tip of Florida and miss, they would be out and hitting the Bahamas and you know, maybe end up in, you know, some really crazy places that they wouldn't be able to get back from. So the safest thing is try to get the best tailwind possible and head to Louisiana, head to the Panhandle. So that's something to think about. All those kites that you're seeing at this time of year, they are coming from all over the place. I mean, they're coming from the Yucatan, but they are on their way to Georgia, to South Carolina, to Miami. You know, once they get to here's the next picture. So each color again is a different bird. So let's follow a line here. So there's, oh, it's hard. I should have, let's see. So there's this light pink line, or the purple line, let's say, and then it comes up and then it turns, and they were going up to South Carolina or this Georgia area, just south of Savannah. So, you know, once they come up from the Yucatan, they return to their nesting area. But look at this red bird, if you can see. This was a bird that came and circled in adverse wind. We could watch this bad cold front coming against it. And then it got like 40 miles from the tip of Louisiana and we lost the signal. It was very sad. And then this blue line over here, bird hit really hard winds and then came back to Mexico and then decided to go up and around the Gulf instead of cross again. So they really are creatures of the wind. They have to get a good tailwind to get across safely. Some birds sneak through in less than 24 hours, but we've had birds over the water for 3 full days and nights, and that is about the maximum we've ever had a surviving bird. So think of those birds. I mean, swallowtail kites aren't the only birds crossing the Gulf of Mexico in the next couple months, as all our feathered friends are coming north. Just know that these cold fronts are so hard on them. I mean, they might leave the Yucatan and think, man, I've got the best tailwind, I'm doing it. And then they have no clue that there's this hard north wind pounding against them once they get halfway out there. So it's tough being a migrant bird in general. But many live to tell the tale and to make that whole cycle over once again. All right, you ready for some snail kite action? Oof, I get worn down with all that excitement because it's happening right now, all that migration. But here is a non-migratory bird, our feathered friend, the snail kite. Beautiful, beautiful birds that are so dependent on water and snails, of course. So we've been working with various organizations and funding sources to learn more about snail kites. We've done a lot of tracking studies and we're collaborating with many people on different importances of the snail and these wetlands all over Florida and how they have to navigate them to survive. They are only found in Florida as well, like the short-tailed hawk, but they are also within the Caribbean, mostly Cuba, and they're in the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, and then parts of South America as well. But within the United States, they are only found in Florida. And these are the main areas that they are found in Florida. But note that just recently, since 2018, I think, they've started to nest in Alachua County and at Paynes Prairie Preserve. Right after Hurricane Irma, it was a perfect storm of filling the wetlands there with plenty of water, and there was exotic snails, which we'll talk about in a second. But now it became for 2 years in a row the most important nesting area for snail kites in the years. Let's see, I think it was 2019 and 2020, where there was just, they all came up there, and this was the first of them ever nesting here in these strong numbers. So historically, there's been records of these birds within other parts of Florida, but the stronghold is the Kissimmee chain of lakes and down through the Everglades and Lake Okeechobee. But this was such a disjunct nesting area that it's very, very interesting to see, how they found it and how they are doing in these areas. So they're endangered federally and state. They have this specialized diet. They only eat apple snails. Well, occasionally you'll see them with a baby turtle or a crayfish, but I would say like 96.3% is apple snails, which are completely dependent on good water quality and hydrology to survive, both for their prey and their nest sites. So let's talk about exotic snails. These are both apple snails, but the one on the left is our native Pomacea, and the one on the right is one of a few different exotic apple snails that come from South America. Now, it was the snail kites are able to eat these, and it just takes them longer. The chicks struggle with it at first. It takes them, they have to find a different kind of substrate to feed on because they can't wrap their feet around it at in one grasp. So they often come down to more of a platform to feed and eat the snails. But these guys are they're here to stay. They're just super invasive and really taking off in waterways all across Florida. So our telemetry studies, we just recently tagged 3 birds at Paynes Prairie. So the northern part where I was just talking about in that disjunct population. And those birds were doing awesome there in Paynes Prairie, but hey, they can fly. The waters change, the water dries up, the snails, become inaccessible. And these birds can just go and check out all these other historic places where other breeding concentrations of snail kites are, and other historic foraging areas. So it's like they've got this roadmap in their heads of where to go. It wasn't much wandering. It was like direct through very known areas that had other concentrations of snail kites. The cool thing, I mean, the birds we tagged up here were adults, and which makes that, so we know that they were born in some southern location because Payne's Prairie just came online essentially as a nesting place. So they were too old to have been born there. So they already had this kind of wandering attitude, and they found their way up there, and they've found their way back. They've come back and forth every year a few times, and 2 of the 3 are back in Payne's Prairie as we speak. And the water levels are pretty good. And I do know that there are birds nesting there as we speak as well. So over our years of telemetry study, all of these dots you see, each color is a different bird, and each dot is a GPS location within, this southern part of Florida. And if you can see these kind of hashed polygons in the background, those are the historic known nesting areas of snail kites. And over half of our locations were outside of those locations, these Kissimmee chain of lakes and Lake Okeechobee, and then this is the Loxahatchee area and the conservation area 3A and 3B, and then there's SDAs in here, and then of course the greater Everglades area. So these guys aren't paying attention. They're not they're not sticking to the rules. Hey, snail kites are supposed to be within these areas. So they're traversing and using places outside of the known and the most historic breeding areas. They cross over unsuitable habitat, basically canals that are filled with these exotic snails. You can see this like litter on this grate here. That is the remnants of many, 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 many snails eaten by snail kites. So, they've got easy pickings and are filling up in these crazy canal type situations throughout Florida, which we know there are many of. They can make these long distance movements. And like I said, from the Payne's Prairie group, they directly went straight to Lake Okeechobee, straight to Kissimmee or Lake Toho, these places where other breeding and feeding snail kites are. So they probably fatten up, and they maybe when the going is good, they decide to check out other places so they know what to go to when the going is bad. Those are things we want to know. We want to sample more snails within these foraging areas to know when the birds are moving. Are they in good health? Is it good conditions, or are things starting to get bad? Like, is it drying up, or is it too deep? There's a certain level where the kites will be able to access food more easily. So if they're struggling, they're gonna start moving. So essentially they're nomadic. They fly to where these wetlands are that are ready to provide food and maybe nesting areas. So in any given year, some wetland may not be appropriate or not, but as long as over time there's in each year there are places where the water level and is good for their nest conditions as well as their prey. So they have to have access to prey to make it even interesting or suitable for them to want to even nest nearby. So obviously you can imagine how much of a management challenge this is. We can't just corner them into one lake or one water system because these change so much. we have to be able to, you know, be fluid per se with what the water conditions are across these big areas of Florida. So, you know, as long as there's conditions somewhere, they're going to move, and they do. And we see, you know, our birds from Payne's Prairie now nesting in Lake Okeechobee, and birds from Palm Beach County now in Lake Kissimmee, you know, in Osceola County. And so they move around, and that's like what makes them able to adapt and change and hopefully hold on to their ability to nest and make more babies. So there's a lot they have to do in a year. So I wanted to show you the year in a life of a snail kite that we tagged in Hendry County. So we'll follow her around. She was a young bird when we caught her, so probably 2. She was in a canal, canal here on the CR County Road 846. So she hung out in over the Orange Grove canals, kind of gross water, but then she'd start making these little trips into other canaled areas like Lehigh Acres and the around Immokalee. So that was about a month. Then she just zoomed up past Lake Istokpoga. Now she's on the southern part of Kissimmee, Lake Kissimmee. Spent there quite a while until November. And then she went up to Lake Tohopekliga, which is also a big nesting area, but really liked Kissimmee. Now down to Moonshine Bay on the western part of Lake Okeechobee, back to Lehigh Acres. And we'll see all these canals if you can zoom in here. Harns Marsh is a known nesting area. So she checked that out for sure. But these are big canals that she's feeding in mostly for a few months here around Lehigh Acres. Coming back to that central spot, which is a water retention facility in that community. Then she went to South Florida, down into the Everglades. I'm always happy to see birds down here. It's like, oh, this is really where snail kites should be. You're eating native snails. That's probably mostly what's out there. Not too many exotics, although they're getting there. So she explored there for a couple months. But then by June, she headed back north to Moonshine Bay. And there's quite a big nesting population here, but not every year. Again, it just depends on good water. So that was her year in a life. She ended up there in August previous or past. So, and I'll put up a few other tracks from 10 different birds, each a different color. And then that green that just came up is the historic nesting areas and snail kite areas. So you can see they are using all sorts of places within Florida. Oh, so I'm going to wrap it up here and just kind of bring it back to what you can do for these birds. You know, we can, there's things we are doing that your support would be awesome for helping, continuing monitoring these birds and tracking them to learn more about them over time, and find roost sites, finding nest sites. And we do have a presence on Facebook and our website. We do a blog, especially on our, you can report your sightings. A lot of snail kites are banded. If you see this tab on top that says get involved, that under that you'll see report sightings, and we take swallowtail kite and snail kite and short-tail hawk and a few other wading birds that we're tracking right now. Reddish egrets, great white herons. I think white-crowned pigeons are on there as well. So we are also doing a nest watch project. So if you are aware of a swallowtail kite nest in your area, or maybe you think there's nesting activity, you can log in and register the nest and then keep track of it over time. And that is so valuable to us because we're just a small nonprofit. There's basically 2 of us full time, and we can't get to all these wonderful places. And we've got some great information and background on how to safely observe the kite nests for yourself, and as well as for the birds and land managers in the area. So keeping yourself out of trouble on private property and all that good stuff. But these are things you can help us with. So with that, I'll happily answer any questions. And I do want to, stress checking out our website and taking my email. And anytime you have questions on these species, I'd be very happy to answer any questions. So I will attempt to put my video on and stop the share here. Okay.
Well, thank you, Gina, for an excellent presentation. After we got through those technical issues, it went very smooth and we could hear you well. And that was just fascinating.
Okay.
A number of questions came in. So without further ado, I'll jump right in, if that's okay. The first question was whether, and this isn't necessarily related specifically to the species you covered, but a question about whether the cutting of Tallahassee's urban forest area would be increasing or decreasing hawks, and could this be why the person is seeing more squirrels in town? I don't know how familiar you are with Tallahassee's.
If I don't know the area, but yeah. So were they harvesting specific, like selective cut, or are they? I guess I don't know. So it's the whole forest is gone. Do you know?
Maybe they mean cutting of selective oak trees. I'm not. Maybe the person who asked can clarify. Old growth, large trees.
So now there are more squirrels. Man, I would think the squirrels would like the trees. Gosh, I don't know how to answer that. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. We can move on to the next one. So the next one is how does the Institute use the data from public sightings? You mentioned at the very end there about submitting nests, and how do they use that information specifically?
Well, we keep it private, so it's not shared, but especially with nest sites, what we're looking for is maybe opportunities to, in specific places, we may be wanting to start a tracking program. So the way we capture a kite is near a nest site. So that's always useful, but also really it's to know and keep the protection for that nest. Since swallowtails, most of these species, swallowtails and shorttails, if they were successful the year before, they often come back and they want to use that nest site again. So we'd love to make sure those places are protected and that they can return to those places year after year to nest.
Awesome. And are you doing any specific work in the Panhandle concerning either these species or other species?
Well, now with swallowtails, I mentioned working with timber companies, and so we hope to monitor nests and maybe capture a bird or two in the Panhandle, close to Pensacola, actually. But we haven't. We followed a bird from St. Mark's for a year, but we've never tagged a bird farther west than that. So that would be very interesting because we don't know if they come through the peninsula of Florida to migrate south or if they go to around the Gulf of Mexico. They could go either way. In fact, a bird from Louisiana has come through the panhandle, through the peninsula and gone across the ocean south. So they could go either way, and it'd be really interesting. We assume that they're on the big river systems there, which they often follow rivers. It's a great migratory tool for the kites.
Cool. Well, everyone on this call is a birder. Keep those observations coming for sure.
Please.
Here's this is actually a question I wondered as well. Are those 12 roosting or staging sites that you showed and talked about for the swallow-tailed kites on public or private land? And the second part of that question is, what are the numbers like specifically in those sites?
Yeah, they're all over the place. A lot of them are on public lands. So there's a handful that are protected, and then so the ones we fly over, we do know some roosts that people can count from the ground, and we get that information during that time frame as well. But we try to fly over the known ones that are going to be about 50 birds or more. But we've had some of the biggest roosts can get up to over 3,000.
That is crazy. And I guess as a follow-up, are there places where the public can see those staging areas, or even if they are on public land, are they way out there?
Yeah, they're way out there, and some of and then the private ones, yeah. But really, the best opportunity to see an amazing situation is to try to find a foraging aggregation. They're very vulnerable in a roost, and encouraging public or people to go by it, and sometimes they do, and it's a little of precarious situation because we really want to make sure everything goes right and they come back to those places because they have been using them over and over. They're just so important for them to rest and have that safe place to come. Really tricky.
And I guess tying into that, you mentioned that site in Gilchrist County. What would be a good time to go to that site and maybe get more information about how to see that if people are interested?
If you watch eBird, and there's a lot of blogs I see, or at least Facebook pages that talk about the kites. And often with our blog, because it's a foraging aggregation and it's a safe place to watch kites, I encourage people to go. So we'll post about it. But they often start mid-July to the first or second week of August.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. We had a question specifically about the chicks for swallow-tailed kites, and the question was, what is the chick and fledgling kind of survival rate? How long does it take to reach a breeding age? And let me see if I understand this correctly. If fledglings aren't making it to breeding age, is that one of the main issues that's kind of limiting population growth?
Good question. So we think it's about 30% chance of survival to the first birthday. So, once a chick fledges, it has a 30% chance of making that migration south and back, they start breeding most likely in their 3rd year. So the cool thing is, and what we haven't done yet, just because of the technology is expensive and the fact that only 30% make it, something we would like to do is tag juveniles or nest what they do their first few years of life. So we've done that with VHF because it's less expensive, but over time, and seen, you know, sometimes we've had transmitters last about 3 years and we won't hear them their first year, but we might hear them their 2nd or 3rd year. So are they staying in South America? Which, hey, they can, because they don't have to get up to a breeding territory, you know, why not stay on vacation? So that would be a really cool study to see what the juveniles do. And now that the GSM transmitters are lighter and less expensive, that might be a question to dive into.
Sounds like an excellent research question for a PhD or something. Very fascinating. We've got 2 more questions if you've got time for them. One is mine, and that question is, I remember a couple of years ago, a report of a snail kite. I can't remember if there was a photo attached, but it was a good birder who reported it from the Wasissa River up here in Jefferson County. I'm curious, were they there in the past, or is that just a waif snail kite? And it seems like the prairie lakes, like Lake Jackson, Lake Miccosukee, you know, Imonia would be good habitat. Were they in those places, or is that just a random individual?
I don't know the history, unfortunately, about if they were there, but I mean, I think it's only a matter of time. I mean, they're now nesting in Gainesville, and and then using the Lake City wetlands as well. So and there's like a bird that hung out for months in South Carolina that was banded, and even a banded bird, gosh, I want to say it was from Paynes Prairie, tagged by the University of Florida, flew into South Carolina and back. So I don't know the habitats of around those lakes so much, but gosh, I know the exotic snails are exploding, so they could definitely make do there for a while. Whether there's you know, breeding substrate that they would like, but definitely can imagine, especially a juvenile on its first little foray, they just wander because they can.
Yeah, cool. Well, that gives me hope. I hope that they do move up here. A question, the other one was, Cowbone Marsh has changed dramatically, and what has been the response with, I assume the question relates to snail kites there. I'm not sure, but what's the status there?
Cowbone Marsh. I know where this is. Is it down by Okeechobee? Shoot, Cowbone Marsh.
Maybe whoever asked it can clarify the Cowbone Marsh question. That'd be great. While we're waiting on that, a couple people mentioned snail kites nesting in neighboring counties. The ones I mentioned as recently as 1950. And Dana Bryan said snail kites used to be at Wakulla Springs. There's a film of one in the Florida Memory Project. I did not know that. That is fascinating. And Jim Cox mentioned that Cowbone Marsh is a big roost west of Lake Okeechobee, ASTK.
So that's Cowbone. Yeah. So that's Nicodemus Slough as well. So that has definitely changed, and the kites are still there in big numbers for sure. What happens is they've moved around. There's such a big group of them that they stretch out for over a mile. So and within that mile, they use different trees and stuff, and that's on private. Well, it's kind of half private, half public, depending on which side of the road or the marsh they're on. But still a very, very important place for swallowtail kites at roosting before they migrate to South America. And something just to add on, I don't think I mentioned this, but a bird tagged in, say, Collier County, South Florida, may not, go to the nearest roost, one of these communal roosts to fatten up for migration. We had a bird go all the way to this North Carolina border, eat twice, 2 years in a row. It's like done nesting, go completely the opposite way, and spend a month and a half there before migrating. So they can fly so well. They just take up and go. It's quite cool, and we wouldn't know this if we didn't tag a few. So those birds are taking it for the team, is what I think. It's like, there's a lot they're taking on, but we've seen them breed. Okay, so yeah, we learned a lot.
Yeah, that concludes the questions. Great questions all. Thanks again, Gina. I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to close us out.
Well, thank you again. Oh, Gina, that was just a wonderful talk. And had the great fortune of seeing all the snail kites at the Alachua Sink at Paynes Prairie. And quite unexpectedly, it was like a month before the pandemic lockdown stuff. And it was just amazing to watch. There were at least a dozen snail kites flying over and scooping up snails. And one flew to a tree close to where I was standing and, ate a snail there and then dropped the shell. And it was just, oh my gosh, I was just amazed, to see them fairly close, actually. It was a stunning experience. So thank you again. This will be posted on our YouTube channel. So we'll have that up in a day or so. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Gina. And reminder that Noah Stricker talk will be on April 3rd and April 5th. And check out our website and social media for more information. Good night.